All right, let's get started. A warm welcome to everyone. I'm waiting 2 seconds for my colleagues to confirm that the audio and the video works well. Hopefully it does. It seems it does. And in the meantime, as we usually do, please type into the chat box where are you dialing in from to join the live event on the 29th of May to talk about this wonderful opportunity of the relaunch of two major competitions. I see the input coming in, so presumably you hear me, see me well from Portugal, Belgium, Italy, Pakistan, Warsaw, Jamaica. Wow, truly global participation. Very much appreciate you being here. And I'll get started because we have a lot to cover about these two competitions that I'm going to discuss in detail. Now, a very quick housekeeping, a very quick sound check, which we have confirmed works fine. If there's any issue with that, there is an app for this particular platform, Click Meeting, with the meeting ID that you can put that in. But usually restarting the webcast or restarting your browser does the trick, and it's going to work fine. So with that, this is being recorded, and the recording, the slides will be shared with you, but there is a special discount that I will offer in the end for those of you who are here at the live version, and hopefully that will be of interest. And also you can, and you are encouraged to ask questions in the chat box, which my colleagues who are working diligently in the back will be feeding that to me. So I will pick and choose the ones I can quickly answer, the ones that are relevant to everyone on this particular event. But we will make sure that every question gets answered. So we'll find a way to follow up or provide the question and answer form afterwards to be sure that all the questions are properly covered. So with that, I won't bore you with my background. You might know my work with EU training and with the Ultimate EU test book, and that I used to be a commission official, and now dedicating my time to interesting and exciting projects. And one of them being this very presentation to talk about the Economist and Crisis and Migration exams and what has changed since it was launched. Very, very briefly about our company, those of you who are new, those of you who have not yet had a chance to explore the many services that we offer for your preparation to pass EPSO competitions, and in particular, the ones that I'm going to cover today. So we have a large community of many registered users over the 15 years that we are in business, helping candidates to pass the competitions, and even more broadly, not just EPSO competitions, but internal competitions that the European Commission, the Committee of Regions, the European Parliament, and other EU institutions offer. We provide help and coaching and webinars and information and online tests to help your, not just your preparation, but contribute to your success. Follow us on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn. We have a growing community there, and very dynamic conversations and very active candidates. So with that, test packages and all the rest are available. You can explore that on the website. And as I mentioned before, there will be an exclusive offer for those of you who stay all the way. So we'll spend roughly 60 minutes, 1 hour in your lunch break. Well, that depends on your time zone, but those of you who are on Central European time, you might be sacrificing part of your lunch break, which we appreciate. And then in the end, I'll share that code with you. Now, very interesting, very exciting, and it's a very positive development that yesterday EPSO has finally decided that the long winter sleep, the long waiting is partly over. And those of you who may be new to EPSO exams and new to the Economist and the other crisis and migration exams, a tiny bit of context that the exams, these exams had been suspended because they had been launched at the end or towards the end of last year. And in October, there was a suspension due to various issues, and I'm going to say a few words about that. But what we're looking at today, and the name of today's webcast is EPSO Applications Reopened. So there is a certain refresher for those of you who had participated in the original edition, and now you're looking at what has changed, what are the tiny tweaking and bits and pieces that are different from the original version of this particular competition. And those of you who are new to this, you'll get a full overview of the different steps and the nuts and bolts of this particular relaunch. So with that, the selection process, everything starts with the application based on an EPSO profile. So you create a profile on the EU careers on the EPSO website, and you need to validate and upload supporting document. And then there is going to be a testing, computer-based testing, which is partly, or it includes reasoning skills, a field-related multiple choice quiz, and then a written test based on a written assignment. And we're going to go into much more detail about each step and every part or each part of this. But in a nutshell, then it is followed by an eligibility check and ultimately a reserve list. And your name on the reserve list means that you are eligible to be recruited by one of the EU institutions. There is no guarantee, unfortunately, but it's a prerequisite for your permanent EU job to be an EU official, a fonctionnaire, to be on a reserve list and then eventually be hired on the basis of that list. So let me start with the changes to the process, because I do assume that the vast majority of you had already signed up and participated and probably took the test back in October 2023, after which the exams due to technical problems was basically canceled. I was hesitating to say suspended. Well, suspended and then canceled. Though again, legally speaking, I'm not sure cancellation is the right term, because what we're seeing here is the relaunch of it. So to some degree, it was hibernated. So the key reason for change, as I mentioned earlier, it was essentially due to technical problems that the system froze and many people couldn't submit their answers, because we're talking about remotely administered, remotely proctored tests. That meant you had to use a computer, your own computer, or other computer, take the test remotely, not in a test center. And there were lots and lots of bugs and technical problems and lack of customer support and things like that, which eventually led to an avalanche of complaints, which then resulted in the suspension. Now, there is a new testing method, or a new testing software to say. So the retesting will occur under the new online proctoring conditions. There is a company that has already provided certain tests, and I don't know whether they are going to be the one that's going to run this particular test. Most likely, yes. It's called the TestWe, so test and WE. Regardless, they will be responsible for the smooth running of the remotely administered tests. A big question, I'm saying it as a side note, but it's an important side note. A big question will be whether in the new system or the new interface or the new app that you will need to download on your computer, is it going to work only if you are an administrator, if you have administrator rights to the computer, or it's going to be enough, perhaps it runs only in the browser and you don't need to install something on the computer. And that makes a major difference, because many candidates are working for institutions, are working for corporations or companies where you have a work computer, but you're not allowed to download an app from this particular provider and install that on your computer. So that is an open question, something we're going to be looking at, because it has an impact on which computer you can use, or you need to find an alternative tool or an alternative device. Reopening of testing. So all candidates, even those who had completed a test back in October, must retake all tests, because of the quality of chances and to make sure that there is no benefit or there is no undue positive impact for those who had taken it back then and faced no technical problems versus those who did. So to create a level playing field, everyone needs to retake these particular tests, even if you had done it already in October. And a very, very important change, which is something we're going to come back to because it has a lot of practical implications, is the introduction of the 24 language regime. So what that means is you will need to choose any of the 24 official languages, any two of the 24 official languages of the EU, depending on which part of the exam we're talking about. But there's no longer a system where the main language or one of the languages has to be English, French, or German. And it was sometimes Italian or Spanish, because there were a lot of legal challenges and court cases against EPSO for using that particular language regime. And it was considered that it can be discriminatory despite having English, French, and German as working languages. But the court, the European Court of Justice, in many cases did not judge it justified to limit the choice of languages to only those three, even for certain parts of the competition. So what happened in the end is that it got opened up. So the 24 language regime has been introduced. And that has certain implications for the written test. And that's something I'll come back to in short order. And talking about the written test, so that is the new name, that's the new terminology of what used to be called case study. We no longer have case study, we have written test. And that is going to be based on publicly available materials. Why? Because of practicality, probably also for budget reasons and just the pure logistics of it. The materials have already been translated, because these will be materials that are available presumably on EU institutions' websites and various publications that the translation office had already translated into the 24 official languages. And those will serve as the basis of the written test. And that means that we are no longer expecting materials in the written test which are specifically developed or specifically written for this particular test. So they're not going to be invented or created or mock emails, or not going to be a press release that was created and drafted and written just for this particular exam. So it's all going to be based on things that are readily available online. Now, obviously, you don't know yet what exactly that's going to be, but, and that's something I'm going to go into more depth when we talk about this particular element of the competition, these will be communicated to you beforehand. So you will have presumably a background material that you can analyze before the competition takes place. So more details on that when we get to that particular aspect. Competitions overview. Perhaps before I go there, are a couple of questions coming in as I see. So why don't I answer one or two and then I go on. So have you heard rumors about new dates when the test will take place? Now, it's all rumors, and I probably should have included at the very beginning, but at least I include it now. Whatever I tell you is certainly based on our perspective, our experience, and our very best knowledge, but I'm not EPSO. I'm not the authority that can pronounce one way or another. So whatever I tell you, I do my very, very best effort to be very accurate, even in my choice of words. But the official information is always in the notice of competition and the selection board, and ultimately EPSO as a service. So the answer, when the exams are likely going to take place, we're expecting around October, September, October. So almost certainly not before the summer break, given the deadlines and given the way the whole system has been organized. I consider very likely to have these from September or October. Here's another question, which last time the multiple choice questions that we as EU training offered were off. And compared to the actual competition, have we updated them? And the answer is yes, we have updated them, because our experts have seen some of those questions and they have reviewed everything. So we have done a lot of quality check and updating based on the database that we had. So let me just move on to further questions at a later stage. So just to be sure I cover all the core aspects of what I had planned. How many positions are available? This is public knowledge, so it's out there. There has not been any change compared to the original, meaning the 2023 numbers. So macro and microeconomics, 300 places on the reserve list, financial economics, 348, industrial economics, 322. So it's a large competition, and it does offer a lot of opportunities for everyone who wants to participate. And given the numbers which had been disclosed a year ago, or well, it's not yet a year ago, but last October was like, what, 6 or 8 months ago, given the number of applicants which had been publicly shared by EPSO for each profile of this competition, the chances are pretty good. So it's usually three times as many candidates, maybe 4. But again, it's a reasonable competition, unlike some others where you might have 10 times more applicants than places on the reserve list. And then when it comes to the crisis management and migration and internal security, so 168 places for the first domain and 118 places, which again, these are large numbers. It's not like you have 5, 10, 15 places on the reserve list. Big question for everyone, are you eligible? And that is usually quite a straightforward question, meaning as long as you meet certain formal criteria, then you are considered eligible. The more tricky part is your professional background, so your degree and the years of work experience that you have. So I'll talk about it in a second, but just to cover this part, you need to have an EU citizenship, you need to have fulfilled military service, if that is a requirement in your country of your citizenship, and then meet the character requirements, which partly means that if you are hired into a position which is very sensitive, let's say trade issues or other, let's say competition law or competition cases, there might be a background check or there might be further checks as to your good standing. And then there is the question about languages and the qualifications work experience. But with the languages, as I said before, they have changed the linguistic regime that they used to have. And now it's this 24-24 system. Well, practically speaking, the two languages have to be different. So it's 24 and 23. So from the 24 official EU languages, and then the second language has to be different. So you're left with 23 options or choices. And then qualifications and work experience. But let's take a look at the languages just to be sure everyone is on the same page, because there's a difference between language 1 and language 2 to the degree that you need to take the computer-based test. So the abstract verbal numerical reasoning in language 1, and then language 2 will be the language for the field-related multiple choice quiz and the written test. And for the practical side of that is what term or in which language are you most comfortable processing information or writing in? Because for language 1, that needs to be a language where you can read the most efficiently, most effectively, you understand everything quickly, you process the information, and you can answer the abstract verbal numerical reasoning quickly. Language 2 should be a language in which you can express yourself at greatest ease, especially in writing. So for instance, I'm pretty good in spoken French. In written French, it's a little more complicated. It takes more processing power for me to write nicely. I'm much more at ease in English because that's what I had studied, or that's how I'm wired. So if you have the luxury to choose between multiple languages, then keep that in mind, which one would be strategically the most advantageous for you to choose given the full options that are out there. So that's the only consideration. Other than that, let's say for future employment or for evaluating your chances, which one might be better, I don't think it's particularly relevant for the sake of the competition. And when it comes to the reserve list and ultimately the recruitment, we still need to see how that plays out, because if you pick two languages, let's say Czech and Polish, because you have parents from these countries or you lived in both places and you're very comfortable and fluent in both. So languages which are not among kind of the big five of the working languages of the institutions, you can perfectly and absolutely pass the competition, provided you pass each of the component tests. Now, how that impacts ultimately your employment chances when you are on the reserve list, at this point, it doesn't seem to me that it has an impact, as long as it's clear from your background, your CV, that you speak at least one of the main official languages, and especially English being the most common one in the institutions. So as long as you demonstrate from your CV, from your background, that you have that linguistic skill as well, that should be fine. So again, we'll see how that plays out, because this 24 language regime is new, and practically this is the first time that it's being used in a competition. I might be mistaken there, but I'm fairly sure that this is the first time when it's rolled out in its full complexity or in its full glory. And the next area was, language 1 and language 2 must be different. So I think I mentioned that before. And then in terms of the qualifications and your work experience, I will not cover these in detail now, because we could just spend a lot of time on the different scenarios that are out there. So I encourage you to look at the notice of competition and look at your qualifications. So which BA degree or MA degree you have, most likely economist for the vast majority of you, but it could be others that are considered as eligible. And then how many years of work experience are you expected to have and you are able to prove? And typically the rule of thumb there is work experience is counted from the date of your degree. So once you had your degree and you had certain work experiences, that's when the calculation is applied, or that's when the calculation can be considered for the purposes of the work experience. And I understand many of you have lots of different scenarios. So am I eligible if I have this degree? Am I eligible if I have 3.5 years, but half of it I spent traveling around the world? How does that calculation come together? So that is something very unique to each one of you, and you need to look at that and evaluate that. So I will not spend further time on this, but if we can be helpful in some way, you let us know, send us a message. Again, without promising that we can pronounce on this as an authority, because in some cases you need to contact the selection board, and perhaps even they will not tell you upfront whether or not you qualify for the competition, but you need to apply, you need to provide all the information in full transparency, and then see how they evaluate your particular circumstances. And then where are you going to work? Well, most likely in Brussels or Luxembourg, given the place where EU institutions are present, mostly. But of course, there are EU representations around the European capitals and even beyond capitals, and you have EU representation or EU delegations, not just in third countries, but also to international organizations like OECD and others. So again, there could be other places of work, but by and large, and typically, it will be European Commission or other EU institutions, which are in vast majority are located in these two cities. And then in terms of notice of competition, you can also inform yourself about typical duties, what you can expect to do, something we could talk a lot about, and happy to provide information as to what sort of job profiles you can expect to have. One thing you will know is the level of the at which you start your EU career, because that is part of the notice of competition. So it's typically 85, could be 87, depending on which exam you're looking at. And all of those details are straightforward communicated in the notice. So let's look at the different competition phases in a bit more detail. But again, before I go into that, I see many questions are coming in, so I'll just pick and choose a few. And so here's one on the big five languages, whether it's English, French, German, Italian, Spanish would be the fifth. Again, as the most commonly spoken languages in the institutions, but officially the working languages are English, French, and German. Do qualifications from UK before Brexit need accreditation? I think yes. You probably need to have that accredited by a ministry or an authority in one of the EU member states. I probably would do that in any case, just to be sure. And there might be some clauses about that in terms of what is recognized as a degree from a non-EU country, which the UK is by now, and to be sure that that is properly accepted and considered. Right, here's one, a longer on condition for eligibility. I'm afraid I won't be able to address it right now. It seems to be a longer question that would need a bit more processing power from me that I currently possess, but it's something we'll come back to, because I know that there are quite a few questions particularly on that. Exam dates should be before deadline for linking the docs. I think what you're asking is whether the uploading of the supporting documents, when that needs to be. And as you'll see in a couple of seconds, the deadline is the 9th of July, and the uploading of the document needs to happen by September. So there's a bit of leeway, and especially if you need to do that accreditation, or you need to do that equivalence of your degree, or any other issue, or you may not have it at hand, then you still have more time, even beyond the application deadline, to get hold of the supporting document. So this time it won't be that the supporting documents will have to be uploaded after the end of the tests like last time. Yeah, so exactly that's the case. It has to be uploaded before the tests, but you have that time span until September to do so. Assuming that the tests are not going to happen beforehand, but I'm fairly confident that they won't, as I had discussed before. All right, I had bought 250 multiple choice questions already. Do I need to buy them again to see the updated version? Those questions that you have already done, then it gets automatically updated. So they were updated on the back end, and you don't need to buy them again. You can do a retake of those questions. All right, crisis management. Are you going to prepare the written test in different, probably a word just missing there, but we're going to look at that and the parallels and the differences between the crisis management migration exam and the economist competition. But by and large, let's say 95% of the way they are structured and organized, 95% they are identical in the structure, in the rhythm, in the different components. So we're going to look at that right now. What are the competition phases? So in more depth, we're looking at that high-level picture that we had examined at the beginning. So application process starts with the candidates. And then those who had already applied or had already submitted applications, you still need to revalidate your application. So you do not take it for granted that your application had been sent in and it's going to be taken on board. So make sure that you log in, you click the right buttons, and make sure that it's in the system. And then declare the eligibility about your profile. Pick the language number one, number two, as I had said earlier. So give it some thought if you have the luxury of speaking multiple languages, and say, okay, which one I'm going to choose for 1 and 2 that I can really optimize my exam performance in. And then the application itself can be submitted in any of the EU's 24 official languages. So that is probably an easy task. So deadline to apply or revalidate the application by the 9th of July. So you still have quite a bit of time. And as I always say, do not leave that for the last moment. If you miss your bus, you miss your flight, you miss your internet connection, the server breaks down, a lot of things can happen. So be sure that you are dealing with it on time. And then the supporting document, the 4th of September. So 4th of September is the deadline for that. So again, you have much more flexibility in that regard. Now, the more substantive parts of what exactly do you need to prepare for? What is the way to succeed in this particular or in these particular competitions? So step one, not step one, I mean, practically step two, but the initial and the core tests are the computer-based tests, so the abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning. Then there's a field-related multiple choice quiz, which relates to economics or the sub-profile within that particular domain that you had chosen. And there is the crisis migration competition, again, related to that particular field that you had chosen. And then there's the written test, which I had already briefly discussed, but more details is something we'll look at right now. Very important, and especially those of you who may be new to this, that all of these will happen online. All of these are remotely proctored, meaning that there is no person around you, there is no test center that you need to go to. It's basically you are responsible to meet certain conditions when it comes to the computer and make sure that there's no one else with you in the room, that you are not cheating, you're not using anything that's unauthorized for the exam or for the duration of taking the exam. And then all of it happens on the same day. There's no separation between the written test or the field related to the computer-based test, as it used to be the case in some competitions where the case study was somewhat separate from the rest of the tests. Here, everything is in one package in one day. You set your mind to it, and then you look at it. As a side note, we are actually working right now on offering a workshop, online workshop that will help the mental preparation of it. So not so much on the actual test taking, but the mindset, and to be sure that you are managing your own stress, that you optimize or your performance, and your performance is the best that it can be on the day. So that is something we're working on. And if you are concerned by that, watch out for that particular service. So going back, what about the computer-based test? Pretty straightforward. And certainly many of you have already taken different tests, or specifically this one back in October, or other EPSO competitions. So when it comes to what we refer to as CBT, which we often refer to as CBT, which stands for computer-based tests, but this one is you can even call that the AVN, like abstract, verbal, numerical. Many abbreviations are flying around, but the bottom line is that these are psychometric reasoning tests first and foremost, meaning that there is the verbal reasoning, the numerical reasoning, and the abstract reasoning. So the verbal reasoning is more than just reading comprehension. It essentially looks at the logical part of it. So making logical deductions, assumptions, and your understanding of the logic of a certain test. 20 questions, 35 minutes. It's a bit tight, but quite still doable. Doable because you understand the text passage, you understand the question, you look at the different statements, usually 4, occasionally 5, and then there's only one correct answer. There's no penalty for giving the wrong answer. It's only positive points when you get the right answer. So certainly when you don't know which one is the correct answer, still mark one of the answers as the correct one, because you still have, if it's 4 options, then 25% of chance that is the right one. So even if you're short on time or you run out of time, and this piece of advice applies to the numerical and to the abstract reasoning just as much. Numerical reasoning, 10 questions, 20 minutes. So all of this, what I'm sharing with you, is the same for the Economist and same for the migration and the internal security competitions. So the timing is identical for all the different domains and sub-profiles. Numerical reasoning, 10 questions and 20 minutes. So again, 2 questions per minute, tight but doable. So there's the data interpretation, there's the reasoning part, you are probably better off if you use some estimation instead of specific calculation, but you have access to a computer. You do have your computer, but you have access to a calculator, which is an on-screen calculator that you can use as part of the numerical reasoning. So that makes things easier, but then you're competing against the time, against the clock. So whenever you can, try not to use the calculator. Abstract reasoning, 10 questions in 10 minutes. For most people, especially those who may not have the maths mindset, this tends to be the most challenging. So it does require a certain amount of preparation because it's one question per minute, and that is pretty tough. So you have these weird shapes and forms which have their own logic, and they move around and turn and spin in according to a certain system. And that is the system that you need to reverse engineer to be sure that you find the next one in that particular sequence. Right, so where the two competitions or the two main domains, the economist and the internal and the crisis, where they differ is the calculation of the scores. So there is always a pass mark, and then there could, it not just could be, but in this specific case, there is a difference between how two of the three are grouped together. So here's what I mean. Economist competition, the numerical reasoning is somewhat separated, and they say, well, the pass mark here is 6 out of 10. So not 50%, 60%. So you need to get 6 out of 10 right for you to pass. And then the verbal reasoning and the abstract are lumped together, and the pass mark there is 15 out of 30. So basically, if you mess up all the abstract reasoning and you get practically at least 15 verbal reasoning questions right, you can still pass. So that's probably good news, but you probably don't want to risk it. So certainly you want to give your best performance, but for you to keep in mind that your number one concern, if you are in the economist competition, is probably going to be the numerical reasoning. And I think it kind of makes sense because we're talking about economists where you need to work with numbers. So making sure that your performance there really is good, because even under stress, or if you mess up a couple of questions, you still have at least 6 points out of 10. So this will have an impact whether the rest of the exams, the rest of the components, the exams that you take on the exam day, whether it's going to be scored or not. But I want to emphasize that you still need to take all of those on the exam day. So it's not that immediately they give you that answer to say, hey, okay, here's the response. You don't even go further because you haven't passed. So I'd say that with a small caveat that we don't know how the new system is going to work. So they might as well do that live, but I doubt it, because at least for one reason, I'm pretty confident that they will not do it. And that reason is that occasionally they might discover that one question or another question just wasn't up to par, that it wasn't accurate enough, and they have to invalidate that. So they need to recalculate the scores, which cannot be done while the candidates, you, are taking the exam and it's still happening. So as I'm thinking out loud about this, almost certainly they will not give you the live response whether or not you passed. So you need to take each component, including the field-related multiple choice quiz and the written test, on exam day. So this was for the economist. And then for the crisis and the migration competition, the pass mark is configured differently. So here is the verbal reasoning that is separated. So for verbal reasoning, you need to have at least 10 points out of 20. And then the numerical and the abstract are lumped together, where you need to have at least 10 points. So here, if you get all numerical reasoning right and all the abstract reasoning wrong, or the other way around, you can still pass. This is not a ranked competition. I mean, exam, this particular one. So it doesn't matter if you pass with perfect score or you're just getting by, and you still jump over the threshold, the hurdle, and you pass. It doesn't matter. As long as you get the minimum score, the pass mark, you're good for both crisis migration and the economist competition. And then comes the next bit. There's a bit of pause on exam day when you're taking it. You stretch your legs, you go to the bathroom, you drink a bit of water. And then comes the next one, field-related multiple choice quiz. So this one, it's 40 minutes and 30 questions. And given that we're talking about knowledge-based questions, these are not testing your skills or abilities. This is purely your knowledge in microeconomics or industrial economics or migration issues or crisis management issues. So it really focuses on the domain of your particular competition. 40 minutes, 30 questions, pass mark at least 15 out of 30. That's just the minimum, but it actually doesn't matter to some degree because this particular test is ranked. So you need to be among the highest scoring candidates. So that's why I'm saying whether it's 15 out of 30 is the pass mark, doesn't matter because almost certainly every single candidate is going to be above that. What matters is how high do you score, what is the ranking that you can achieve. And that goes for the economists, for crisis, for migration, for all these domains. This is taken in language 2, and that is actually important to emphasize beyond what I had said about the written part of you being able to express yourself in that particular language in writing, that you know the abbreviations, that you know the name of the EU programs, that you know the institutions in that particular language. So if there's a reference to Frontex office, if it has a different name in the language that you're taking it in Greek or in Latvian, you need to know that particular abbreviation or the way it's called, so you don't get lost in the linguistic labyrinth because of your linguistic choice. So be sure that you are very familiar with the terminology in that particular language before you pick one. And then pass mark needs to be reached. I said that before, but again, it is ranked. You need to be among the highest scoring candidates. And once they calculate those numbers and see, okay, do the ranking, that's going to determine whether the written test is going to be scored. And that determines whether your eligibility is actually checked by the selection board. And ultimately, whether you go towards the reserve list. But to get on the reserve list, you also need to pass the written test. So the written test is an interesting one. I said before, this used to be the case study, not anymore. This is a written test. Big difference is that it doesn't test your knowledge in the field. Let me repeat that because it's really important. It does not test your knowledge in the field. So what it does test is your written communication skills. That is the primary focus of the written test for these particular competitions. I'm not saying that for future competitions or other domains, it may be, or it would be the same. But in our particular case, focusing on the economist and the 3 sub-profiles, crisis, migration, the written test is only looking at the written communication skills. Taken in language 2, you have 45 minutes, and the materials based on which you will need to answer a particular question or assignment, to write a report or a briefing or some sort of a summary or a memo. It's based on publicly available documents. And according to what has been communicated so far and also the past experience, this will be shared with the candidates beforehand. So you will actually have those background documents before the exam. You can analyze it, you can look at it. And at the exam, you get a particular question or questions, maybe 2, maybe 3, maybe 1, or an assignment based on those documents that you need to provide an answer. So you being familiar with those documents becomes really important. So you want to analyze, you want to read all those documents beforehand and make sure that you're very familiar with what there is inside, so you can spend those 45 minutes in the most effective way possible. Given the fact that this is a written assignment, your written communication skills become truly important, and no use of ChatGPT at the exam. So you need to be able to write properly and clearly and good structure and all the other best practices. So that's something I'll come back to in a second, because we will be offering writing workshops and help you develop your writing skills regardless of the language. So whether it's English, whether it's Bulgarian, whether it's Portuguese, it's about the skill of being able to express yourself and your thoughts in a clear, understandable, succinct manner in writing. So the written test is going to be scored in parallel with the eligibility check, and according to the ranking of the field-related tests. So basically, once they establish that you are among the top-ranking candidates, they're going to look at your written test, say, have you passed or have you not passed? And that's what ultimately going to lead to the creation of the reserve list. One word about the eligibility checks. So make sure that whatever you declare, you can actually support that with documents. So don't just say that I did a traineeship for 6 months when the documents can only prove 4 months. So be sure that you have written documents or evidence and supporting information to prove a certain declaration. And if you don't have a formal document, at the minimum, ask your former employer or to put it on a letterhead and sign it and say, this is declaration on my good word that this person has worked for me and did the following tasks, and it was a paid assignment. So your eligibility is only checked if you have met those criteria and passed all those components. So reach the pass mark, you're one of the highest scoring candidates, and then you reach the pass mark on the written test. So you have not failed the written test. And then ultimately you get on the reserve list. There's no ranking on the reserve list itself. The names are published according to the alphabet, so in alphabetical order. But again, it's your performance and ranking as a candidate beforehand that's going to determine whether or not you are on the reserve list. But once it's established that you've met all the criteria, formal and the tests and the citizenship and the supporting document and all the rest, your name is on the reserve list, and it is not ranked, but it's only in an alphabetical order. And at that point, you change your status from a candidate, you become a laureate, meaning you have successfully passed a competition, you're on the reserve list. And then comes the next challenge, or the next bit, so to say, is actually getting a specific job. So the recruitment part, where they may have an interview before hiring you. Depends on the DG, the Director General, depends on the institution, depends on where they want to offer you a job. But again, that is probably the easiest bit to some degree, because once you're on the reserve list, that makes you fully eligible for full employment. We actually have a webinar exactly on that. I probably need to do a rerun because it was recorded a couple of years ago, though the methods and the ideas there are still just as valid, which is how to get a job once you are on the reserve list. So that is dedicated to that particular bit. And then ultimately, how do you get the job? Certainly, there's a lot to say there in terms of techniques and timing and methods. Our general piece of advice: practice for a couple of weeks, be consistent, whether it's 1 hour per day or 10 hours per week or whatever works for you, depending on where you are in your numerical reasoning or subject matter expertise and the other bits. But be sure that it's consistent, like a sport preparation, and learning the methodology. Certainly, there's the knowledge bit for the field-related test, but there's a methodology for the written assignment. There's a methodology for the abstract verbal numerical reasoning. And once you understand those methods, it's going to significantly improve your performance and ultimately your scores. And the persistence is really a key here, where you are not doing some very intense preparation for 2 weeks and then nothing for 3 weeks. Again, very similar to a sport prep for a different purpose, of course, but still having a consistent timing. And now vacations are coming up, and having some nice cocktail on the beach is certainly much more appealing than doing abstract reasoning, I totally get that. So factor that in and have a certain study plan for yourself that helps you with that discipline. And then doing lots of simulations to the degree that is necessary for your particular knowledge base or baseline where you are in a particular exam or with a particular component. Right, we are here to help. So we have lots of resources online. We have the computer-based test, practice questions, and we're proud to say we have it in 24 languages. We have numerical reasoning, quite a few languages, though their language is less important, and for abstract reasoning, it's really not important. So we have thousands of practice tests, and we're constantly improving the quality and revising it. And we're also coming up with a couple of new services to help your preparation and your understanding of these. We have video explanations. So if you are a bit afraid about numerical reasoning or abstract reasoning, we have these video explanations that walk you through step by step on particular specific problems, mathematical or abstract reasoning problems, and help kind of hand-holding way of saying, okay, here are the steps that you need to get the best result, not the best result, the result, and find the good answer. Multiple choice quiz. So there were a couple of questions here for those of you who had taken or used our services back then. So we've done a full revision and quality control and update of the Economist exam test questions. And then the crisis and the migration test, we fully revamped it and listened to the feedback that we got from candidates and made sure that this meets the exam requirements and what is necessary. And then for written tests, so we have the written test simulation together with evaluation. So if you want us, our experts, to provide you a feedback about your written test, that is something we offer so you can practice and you understand what could be improved in your writing. And this is the Clear Writing Workshop that's coming up. It's on the 2nd of July, so a little over a month from now. It's a 2-hour workshop on helping you with the writing methodology. So we'll be offering that, and there's going to be information about that on the website. And then there are webinars, free ones about the methodology, and there are some pro tips as well available on the website. And for the case study insights, which we probably need to remake, relaunch, and relabel to be written test insights webinar. But again, that is fully relevant, whatever we say there for the written test. So all these free resources are out there with salary calculator all the way to Ask Me Anything sessions. And I know there are many questions here that are eagerly waiting to be answered. So I'll just leave the discount code on the page in a second while I answer as many questions as I can in the time available. A little commercial pitch for my book, The Ultimate EU Test Book. There's a 2024 edition, which is already out. And here's the discount code. And I'll ask my colleagues to put the actual code into the chat box, which is not on the screen, but they will share that with you. It is reopened24, reopened, all caps with a D in the end, 24. So let me take a couple questions while you are looking at that. Can annotations be made in the numerical test? As far as I know, no. So you cannot write on the screen or on the chart. You can use the calculator. You do have a notepad. So you can type whatever you like in the notepad if you're taking different steps to solve a problem, but no annotations on the chart, the image itself. And again, with the caveat that the new interface might allow that, we need to see that. But as things stand right now, that is not the case. Can we choose different language combinations for language 1 and language 2 under this competition, different than you did for the CAST exams? So the CAST exams, that the contract agent exams. And the answer is yes. This is independent of the CAST exam. So you can choose any language combination you like for this particular exam. Next one, does EU training still provide rooms with computers to rent for the exams? And if so, in which cities? Well, you're very kind to assume that we have such a branch and such a network in multiple cities. We have it in Brussels. So at the Square Ambiorix, where our office is. So there we do offer this. So you look up the Ambiorix Center website, and then you can send us a message and we'll follow up, because we have a couple of rooms available which are silent and soundproofed and fast internet and all that, even with a nice headset with noise canceling. So you can concentrate fully on your exam. So we do offer that, yes. Can I change the language for an already bought package for verbal reasoning? I believe that has been answered. The answer is yes, you can change the language. How do we know on which documents are field-related multiple choice questions based? Now, that's a very important question for economists, for crisis, for migration, for all candidates. How do you study for that? Right, so that what is the expected knowledge? Now, one very important source and inspiration or place where you can get ideas is the notice of competition list of tasks and list of duties that you will expect it to do when you are hired in that particular field and in a particular position. So that already gives you an indication. The other is certainly EU institutions' websites and the relevant European parliamentary committees. The European Parliament Research Service, the EPRS, have wonderful materials. Then you are highly encouraged to look at the relevant Commission Directors General that deal with the topics of your exam. So if it's migration, you certainly want to look at the DG Home, and you look at other relevant Directors General in the Commission that tackle issues of concern for that particular competition. There are lots of materials out there, certainly, and we could talk much more about what are some best practices for you to turn that material into knowledge that you can memorize and that you can structure. And that is, I'm just thinking what more meaningful to say there. Well, actually, tools like AI tools and ChatGPT and other similar tools can help in summarizing or converting certain PDFs into more digestible formats, especially if they're pretty long. So if there are 10, 15, 20, 30 page reports on any of these topics, then you probably want to create an outline. And some of these tools that are out there, the various AI tools, can help you to a great degree in summarizing or dissecting the information and turning that into bite-sized chunks. Right. The list of will you provide a list of documents? We don't, and I wouldn't be comfortable providing that either, because we are doing our very best research and talking to people and getting our, let's say, heads around it. But I wouldn't feel fully comfortable providing here are the 15 documents that you need to know. Again, it's something I'll think about. So I won't say we will never do that, but at this point, I would be somewhat reluctant to say, well, this is what you need to know. Perhaps the institutions or at one point EPSO will do that, probably not for this competition, but for the 85 generalist competition, which is likely to take place towards the end of this year, at least according to the rumors we hear. For that particular competition, they're planning to provide a background briefing or a list of documents that you will be advised to look at. But for these competitions we're talking about today, I'm not aware of such reading list or short list or recommended literature, at least not at this point. Next one, reasoning test. Any change in the substance typology of questions compared to previous competitions? Now, very recently, a couple of days ago, EPSO has disclosed a couple of new sample questions for the abstract verbal numerical reasoning. We looked at it with our experts and with our own internal team, and we didn't see any major difference in terms of their difficulty, the style, the number of options out there, the length of the text. None of these variables that determine the style of an abstract verbal numerical reasoning test actually seem to have changed. So we are constantly monitoring and observing and getting feedback from candidates on what they have had at different competitions. So we're adapting our offering. But again, in this case, it just doesn't seem to be necessary because our existing database seems to reflect the level of difficulty and the style of the actual competitions. Does EU training intend to prepare training on the new component, namely the written test? Could you please mention something more on that? This may have come in before I answer that question. So yes, we have a written competence or written skill webinar coming up, as I mentioned. It's a 2-hour workshop online on the 2nd of July. And then we might do a rerun, even though it's fully applicable of the case study webinar that we had done back then last year. And that is applicable for the written test just as much. Am I eligible if my professional experience is in small business? Presumably, yes. I'm not sure which particular competition you're looking at, but let's say if it's Economist, microeconomics, presumably it's just as relevant as anything else. So that seems to be the case. Again, without knowing more context, I'm hesitant to say more, but as long as you can prove that and you have the right number of years and degree, that seems to not be a problem. Written test, will there be an autocorrect function? Oof, that's a good one. I'm not sure that there is a spell check. At one point there was, but I'll crowdsource that question. So if anyone knows the answer to that, please type that into the box because I'm unsure whether it has. And again, with the caveat that we're talking about a new provider and a new interface, which may as well have it. So we can only know what the experience has been so far, but it's going to change now. But again, I'm hesitant to say whether there's a spell check or not. Well, prepare in a way. Yeah, last time there was no autocorrection. All right, thank you, Valentina, for answering that. But then, yes, there is a compatible. Sorry, that's the laptop. So there was no spell check last time. And again, we'll see whether in the new interface that is provided. Prepare with that in mind. So prepare with the mindset that there's not going to be a spell check, and then use words which are not that difficult to spell. So until today, I cannot spell without spell check the word miscellaneous. So I just can't. There's no single occasion when I wouldn't miss one letter in that particular word. So I would very much exclude using that word in a written assignment for fear of misspelling it. But normally, and that's an interesting thing, normally the spelling and grammar are not looked at in the context of your written communication skills. It's somewhat of a contradiction to me, but you are not evaluated on the basis of your grammar and your spelling in your written assignment. Now, if your grammar is abysmal and your spelling is just atrocious, it's not going to help your written assignment. So I encourage you to get that right, but don't stress overly about that because it's not the primary focus of the score that you're going to get and the evaluation. Right, maybe one, two or more, and then we're going to end here. But as I promised, we're going to make sure that you get answers to all your questions. So we're going to sift through all these that I have not yet had the time to answer, and we'll make sure that you get your response. Here's one. For the retake of your question, if half of them were not used yet, can we use those in new languages? I believe technically that should be possible. So the answer is almost certainly yes, but send a message to our customer support. They will be happy to help. Some of the questions on EU training require a use of functions like powers. Since this is not allowed, how relevant are these questions? Well, normally that should not be the case. So if you find that a question cannot be answered otherwise, then send us what we call error report. We're going to look into that and maybe offer an alternative way of solving that particular question without needing to use powers. Right, maybe a final question. And here is one. So written tests. So what do they actually assess? Only how we organize the information? Well, it goes a little beyond that, and it broadly is tied into what they call the competencies. So there's a competency framework that EPSO had put out last year, and one of its aspects focuses on communication. So you can look at what they call the anchors. So what are the building blocks and the basis for evaluating your written communication test? And then certainly there's the how do you organize the information? How logical are your arguments? How much are they connected to the underlying text? Are you answering the question that was actually asked, or you are going into all directions? So there is this red thread in your reasoning or in the build-up. How much do you support what you claim with evidence and with information or references? So there are a lot more to it, a lot more aspects to evaluating a written communication than purely grammar or purely the spelling part. And it's more the substance, the essence, the way it's presented along the lines of what I've just outlined. I think I will stop here in respect of everyone's time and in respect of everyone's attention. So I really appreciate you being here, and thank you so much for listening to this. I hope this was useful. As said before, we'll look at the questions that came in. If something comes up or you're watching this as a recording and you have other questions, please send us a message. We'll make sure to answer everyone to the best of our abilities and the quickest way possible. If there is a certain question, dilemma, or service that you think would be helpful to you, I encourage you to let us know. So to say, well, I'm struggling with this. I have doubts about this. I have hard time understanding this. Please let us know. So we are trying to create products, create info sheets, create services from a 360-degree angle that's going to be useful for your preparation. So I highly, highly encourage you to let us know if there's a challenge that you think could be addressed by our experts or the way we present all that information. So with all that, thank you so much for being here. And I wish you luck. I wish you determination, first and foremost, to get the exam underway and to be sure that you take the preparation seriously. And even if the chances are pretty good, 1-to-3 ratio or 1-to-4 ratio, still take it seriously, because it's ultimately a competition, something where you need to be better than the next person. So we're here to help, here to assist you. A big thanks to Jofi, to Rita, to Eduardo, to everyone who helped make this webinar happen. So thank you so much. Appreciate you working in the back and putting it all together. And to be continued with further events and info sessions. All right. Have a nice day. See you soon.